Now, the last time I spoke to the man I'm about to speak to, we were in the midst of trying to figure out what was going on with Brexit, which seems so long ago, I can barely remember it. Rod Liddle, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, mate. Yes, I remember that.
How's lockdown going for you?
Well, lockdown's it's pretty acceptable for me. I live out in the country, so it's not been a great imposition. I can see that it's a great imposition for Londoners, listening to what you were saying about lockdown, I find myself on the other side of the argument, frankly, which is unusual for me, and quite a few of the people who read my columns are calling me various names under the sun. It may well be that the low infection rate now in London is a consequence of lockdown.
Yes.
You know, the highest infection rate was just as lockdown started.
Right.
And it's come down all the way since then. So I think there's a bunch of non sequiturs going on out there, which is, lockdown kind of has worked.
Well, I think it has. No, I'm with you on that. I actually have a weekly conversation with Peter Hitchens, who's obsessed with the idea that we should never have done it and that we should be much more like Sweden, because he knows some people who live in Sweden. But, I mean, at the end of the day, clearly what they did was they did the lockdown in order to stop there being a massive problem at the hospitals with loads and loads of people turning up and there not being enough beds for them. That worked. And if it now turns out that we've got a very small number of infections now happening, then it clearly worked.
Yes, I think that's right. And it might mean that maybe Sturgeon et al. Are not necessarily wrong, because it's taken Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland are behind us in the curve, and particularly behind London. So you can add a couple of weeks on, probably, to whatever the situation is there. I'm still, wary of the lockdown being lifted. It seems to me that it's not medical or scientific advice insofar as there is any medical and scientific advice which is objective. I don't think there is. None of them agree with each other.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? I mean, never has the phrase, we are following the science, been so kind of meaningless.
Well, no, absolutely. And I remember sniggering right back in early March when a few columnists said, well, at last, some of my columnist colleagues were saying, at last we're going to be ruled through a form of objectivity via science.
Yes.
How naive that was,
Well, I mean, I must admit, I'm quite happy to admit to my failings at the beginning of it all. I didn't really think that it was as bad as it was going to be. I never really thought that, I was one of those who had the argument about the flu and how many people die from the flu every year. And I was not at all convinced that coronavirus was going to be any worse. And in a bizarre sort of way, that has turned out to be true. But yet, it's a very alarming situation, and you can't ignore every other country in the world reacting the same way that we did.
Well, no, exactly. And in fairness, comparison to flu, I think the figures are it's something like 5 times more lethal.
Yes.
But, of course, it's the oldest who are at most risk. I suppose I might be motivated in coming to these conclusions by the fact that on April the 1st this year, I got my senior citizens rail card, which I haven't been able to use.
No, of course. And also, luckily, you didn't pay for it, because if you had done, you'd been told by the National Rail people that if you haven't used it, tough, you'll still have to buy a new one next year and we won't give you a discount, which is what they're doing.
Exactly. Is that what they're doing? Yeah.
Yeah, that's what they're doing, yeah.
That doesn't surprise me.
No. But, I mean, that's the other interesting thing, isn't it? I mean, I'm similar to you, slightly younger, but, I mean, I don't actually know whether I'm at risk in some way, shape or form. I've been fortunate enough not to get it. We've now seen on the front page of the Times today, Boris Johnson's going to launch a war on fat, which apparently would certainly include me. I used to smoke for about 40 years, even though I don't. I know you still do. So my lungs presumably are not in great shape. So hang
on a sec. Start smoking again, mate.
Are you buying this nicotine thing then?
Oh, without question.
Right.
I mean, of the one thing which you can be pretty sure, the rate of infection amongst people who smoke is much, much, much lower.
Yeah.
And that's from 5 or 6 reports, both from America, China, and indeed France.
Yeah.
I think it was 1.4% of people admitted to hospital in China were smokers, when 50% of the country smokes. Then there was a study from the New England Journal of Medicine, which found similar results. And in France, they're giving nicotine patches to people who don't smoke in order to help them fight the virus.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
It's incredible. I mean, we know that there are a few illnesses, very few, that smoking actually protects you a little bit against, such as Parkinson's disease.
Right.
And there's a couple of forms of cancer. But it's very difficult for the health establishment to accept this. They won't. And of course, in the long run, smoking will kill me.
Well, I mean, something will kill you, and it would be the old age-old question: did you die of smoking or die with smoking? That would be what they say. And I mean, that's the other weird thing is that this business of many obese people have been found to be adversely affected. Most of the country now is considered to be obese, so the fact that the obesity rate for people with coronavirus is high, surely is just a reflection of the state of the nation, isn't it?
I think it probably is, yeah.
I mean, I enjoyed your piece last week in the Sunday Times about how inured we had become to actually eating decent food, and the fact that we'd eaten so much fast food over the years had basically changed the way that we live.
It totally changed the way we live, changed our high streets, changed family dynamics as well, in that, by and large, people don't anymore sit down together for an evening meal, but they may just have done a bit more during the last 8 weeks.
Yes.
Or at least one would hope they did. There's loads of statistics which suggest that families do a lot better, and the kids are a lot better off, both mentally and physically, if they sit down and have a nice family meal of an evening with their parents.
Yes. Well, an amazing stat that you quoted, that 1 in 5 meals in America is eaten in a car.
Yeah, they are.
That's incredible.
They're savages, Mike, aren't they?
They really are. It has to be said. I mean, I may never go back there, of course. Normally I go, my mother lives there, my sister lived there, together in Connecticut. My mother's 96. I normally go once a year. I may never get back there. I don't know when the airlines are going to start running again, and if they are running, whether they're going to charge me sort of 25 grand for a New York Kennedy arrival ticket.
Oh, yeah, well, that's terrible. I mean, I was due to go there on my 60th birthday for a nice train journey down to New Orleans.
Nice.
Which it transpired was the very centre of the epidemic.
Well, I mean, it's the kind of a Cheltenham of America, isn't it? Because it was the place where they decided to go ahead with Mardi Gras no matter what.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And the Cheltenham Gold Cup was a mistake, I think we can all...
I think we can agree. But don't you also hate...
And the Madrid game, the Liverpool-Madrid game.
But also the other thing that's interesting is that I remember when they cancelled the Ireland-Italy rugby match from the Six Nations, right? And I remember talking to somebody in Dublin at the weekend that the match hadn't gone ahead. But all of the Italians who had booked tickets and had booked flights and had booked hotels in Dublin came anyway, because they thought, well, we might as well have a great weekend in Dublin. So I mean, actually cancelling it didn't make any difference.
No, indeed. But we were a bit. I thought at the time that we were a little bit slow off the.
Yes, I think so.
And I think it was something like this, an astonishing figure, something like 18 million flights came into Great Britain up to the start of lockdown, and we could have been a bit sharper.
Well, I think so. I mean, I remember asking a virologist, one of the many virologists that we now speak to on an almost daily basis, back in the end of sort of January, when America started testing people as they were coming off planes. And I said, why are we not doing that? And he said, there's no need. Why are we not doing that? Absolutely no need to do that. It doesn't really catch anybody. At the best, you'll do 1 in 5 of the people who are infected. I'm like, well, it's better than nothing. But worse than that, we were accepting flights from Beijing, from Tehran, which had one of the highest incidences of coronavirus, and northern Italy. I went to meet my daughter, who was flying in from Dubai at Gatwick one day, and 2 flights ahead of her were from Venice and Rome.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and they're still coming in.
Yeah, I know.
And the argument that it won't make much difference has been proved to be false. I mean, the countries which really imposed restrictions very early on, whether it be Vietnam or Singapore or indeed Germany, have all seen a far better consequence at the end of it.
So where do you stand on the sort of usefulness or otherwise of the Boris Johnson government? Because obviously there are those out there who would like to blame Boris Johnson for practically everything that's ever gone wrong in the world, including in the history of the world, and others who see a man who is clearly not very well, sort of battling through.
Yeah, I think, I mean, leaving sentiment aside, I think we're kind of mid-table compared to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And if you look at our death rate per capita, we're well below France, Italy and Spain, and the USA, and soon Russia. So I think there are a few areas where he's going to be vulnerable. The obvious one is the one which Starmer is going on about at the moment, which is care homes.
Yes.
But the question then might be, to what extent was it the fault of the government, and to what extent was it the fault of the NHS?
Well, And
so many
certainly
pensioners,
Public Health England.
Public Health England, yeah. That so many pensioners were kicked out of their hospital beds and sent to care homes in order to prepare for the coronavirus. And it was a death sentence in many cases.
Yeah. Although that seems to be based on a rather flimsy Sky News report where somebody was wheeled out to say that, the care homes were practically press ganged into doing it. And I'm not quite sure what that means. Does that mean they were press ganged into doing it or practically?
I think they were told to do it.
Yeah.
It seems as if they were, and certainly the anecdotal evidence from people I know who've been in hospital with a non-COVID illness are saying that if they were of a certain age, they were hurried to get out and asked, when can you leave and do you feel better and get out. I think the care home stuff is a problem. It's a problem for Boris. It's a problem for the NHS, which of course I'm afraid is now you cannot assail it in any possible way.
No.
It's something we all pray to every day, despite the fact that it's not actually terribly efficient.
Well, what we also know is that one of the reasons why the testing regime in this country is so bad is that because it's all been centralised by Public Health England. And in places like Germany, where it's privatised, where you can go to individual labs and have them do the testing rather than it all having to be agreed by some Politburo, it's a lot more efficient.
No, that's exactly right. And we've got to face up to this at some point. We believe the NHS to be this magnificent thing, and there's no question that the people who work for it are magnificent and do a brilliant job. They should be paid more and given better protection.
Yes.
But if you do a study, and Bloomberg has done a study, and there's also another, I forget the name of the institution which looks at healthcare around the world. The NHS performs really, really badly.
Yes.
It's never in the top 10 in Europe. It's below the Czech Republic, Estonia, Portugal, and I think at some point we're going to have to face up to this, that something fundamental needs to be done to the NHS. I don't know if my own party boss, who's on later, William, will agree with me about this, but
I think there's no question that there are many things that we've discovered throughout the course of the last 2 months that are inefficient about the way that we run our public services, not just the NHS, but looking at TfL. I mean, look at Sadiq Khan, who yesterday went with his begging bowl, effectively, and sort of tried to blackmail the government, saying 1.6 billion, please, otherwise I'm going to shut down the transportation system in London, which he has already crippled, by the way, by taking trains away from it when the people needed them most.
Well, indeed, and failing again, and very blithely failing, to give train drivers and bus drivers decent protection, which isn't very expensive. I think the PPE kits are something like 16 quid each.
Yes.
You can get them for.
Well, I mean, you can get masks in my local dry cleaners, because they're nothing if they're not, kind of inspirationally entrepreneurial. They're selling hand gel, they're selling, face wipes, they're selling masks, they're selling gloves, because they can.
I have to say that one of the heroes of lockdown, without question, has been the corner shop.
Yes.
And particularly, the corner shops around where I am are run by a couple of Muslim guys who are absolutely brilliant.
Yes.
They stepped up to the plate from day one. Now, obviously, it means their income has gone up a lot. But, they were making trips to London of 70 miles there, 70 miles back at 3 o'clock in the morning to go to wholesalers.
Yes.
And coming back with everything we needed. I will not go back to the supermarkets. I will stick to my shop.
I mean, I must admit, I have had a similar experience. I now go to Borough Market as often as I possibly can because not only to keep the guys going there, but also the stuff is much better quality.
Very good quality,
and you don't also have to queue up for hours and hours on end to get in. I still don't understand why people are doing that. I mean, the Great British Queue surely has become the kind of watchword for this whole pandemic, hasn't it?
I think it has, and going to supermarkets is an obnoxious experience at the moment.
Well, it always was, really, wasn't it?
And it always kind of was. Yeah, mind you, if you're shopping at Borough Market every day, you'll be skint by the end of the month.
Well, actually say that, but actually, like the vegetable place is no more expensive than your average dinner. I mean, if you're buying, and I don't wish to give away my middle class credentials here, but if you're buying asparagus and broccoli and tomatoes and smoked garlic, it's the same price as it would be anywhere else.
Well, yeah, you're probably right. I get a delivery. I mean, being privileged, living out here in the country, I get a delivery from the local farmers market.
Oh, very nice.
which is basically a bunch of hipsters who rub mud onto potatoes to make them look as if they've come out of
Yeah, they take them out of the plastic bag.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, listen, well, hopefully at some point or other, you may indeed be able to return to these parts, and we may. I'm quite confident that in July there will be some kind of beer garden scenario going on where you will be able to actually go and have a pint somewhere.
Yeah, and there should be a special section of the beer garden for people who want to stay safe and smoke.
Yes.
Yeah, so
you're already getting a lot of clog on Twitter, by the way, for some smoker trying to justify smoking.
Well, I'm not. No, but I mean, Twitter is the land of the mental.
Yes.
But obviously, smoking is far, 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 far more dangerous than the coronavirus. There is no question about that. But that doesn't negate the fact that in this instance, it may provide some protection against coronavirus. The two things can be the same, you know?
Yes, no, absolutely right. Well, listen, are you back in the Sunday Times this weekend?
Yeah, I am. Yes. I think I'll be having a go at China.
Yes.
I haven't had a go at China.
China. You have to pronounce it China.
China. I'm going to stick up for Brian Adams, I think.
Yes, well done. Excellent. Top man. Rod, great to talk to you. Take it easy. Rod Liddle, Sunday Times columnist, Sun columnist, of course, as well. Read him in the Sunday Times. Having a go at China is all the rage at the moment because, of course, yesterday, rather laughably, they were hilariously and very enthusiastically reporting on Sky News that the Chinese ambassador to the UK had said there had been no cover-up. Well, that's all right then.